Nvidia reorganizes its entire $5 trillion compute empire to prioritize autonomous AI agents over human software users. Alphabet launches a staggering $80 billion equity raise to absorb market liquidity, and hackers hijack high-profile Instagram accounts by simply tricking Meta's automated AI support chatbot. Welcome to today's Daily Rundown. I am your host, Anna. This podcast is researched and produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer from University Laval, based in Calgary, Alberta. Today, we perform a forensic autopsy on institutional capital wars, automated social engineering, and the rising tide of equity nationalization this Tuesday, June 2nd, 2026. The global tech stack is being completely re-engineered from the silicon up. At Computex 2026 in Taiwan, Nvidia made it clear that autonomous agents, not humans, are now the primary consumers of global compute. The chip giant introduced the Vera CPU, built explicitly to process agentic code generation and tool use nearly 2 times faster than traditional hardware, alongside its massive 550 billion parameter Nematron 3 Ultra model. As hardware scales, the fight for raw capital has turned predatory. Alphabet blindsided the markets with a massive $80 billion equity capital raise, drawing a $10 billion direct investment from Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. Analysts note this move aggressively drains investment liquidity, right as Anthropic confidentially files its prospectus for a historic $900 billion IPO. But this centralized power is showing catastrophic security blind spots. Meta is reeling after a massive security flaw revealed that hackers have been taking over prominent Instagram profiles, including corporate accounts and the head of the U.S. Space Force, by simply asking Meta's automated AI support bot to change the registration emails and bypass password security entirely. Before we dive into the data, I have a brief strategic request. The algorithms governing the app you are listening on right now dictate what intelligence reaches your feed. To ensure you never miss our daily forensic autopsies, please hit follow or subscribe to the DJAMGAMIND channel on Apple Podcasts to always listen completely ads-free. It takes just 1 second, but it is the single most effective way to protect independent research. Let's unpack the day.
Before we begin today's briefing, a note for the brands listening. If you want to reach the true architects of the AI revolution, the technical leaders actually building the stack, not just the tourists, DJAMGAMIND offers select premium partnership opportunities. Let us position your product directly in front of the ultimate technical buyer. Visit jamgamind.com/partners.
So I want you to imagine for a second that you are the head of the United States Space Force.
Right, which means you hold some of the absolute highest security clearances on the planet.
Exactly. And your digital footprint is, supposedly locked behind these layers of military-grade encryption.
You'd certainly hope so, yeah.
But then a hacker just takes over your high-profile online accounts in a matter of minutes.
Just like that.
And they don't do it by writing some complex, malicious code to breach a firewall.
No zero-day exploits or anything.
Right. They literally just turn on a standard commercial VPN, they open a chat window, and they just ask an AI customer service bot to hand over your password reset emails.
And the AI just does it.
It just politely complies.
Yeah.
Because it's operating entirely on autopilot.
Yeah.
And it actually has the administrative authority to execute that request.
It hands over the keys to the kingdom because it fundamentally lacks the context to understand who it's actually talking to, even though it has the power to alter the infrastructure.
Exactly. And that single incident really perfectly encapsulates the incredible vulnerability of the current moment.
It really does. It highlights this massive structural shift we're going through.
And that is exactly what we are dissecting today. So for this deep dive, we are basically asking you to put on your lab coat and act as a forensic venture strategist with us.
I like that framing. We're doing a sort of autopsy here.
Yeah, a holistic, incredibly clinical autopsy on the news cycle from one very specific day, June 2nd, 2026.
And we've got quite the stack of sources for you today.
We really do. We're pulling from technical journalism covering global computing conferences, heavily scrutinized SEC filings, confidential IPO prospectuses.
Not to mention, state-level legal complaints out of Florida and some pretty intense political op-eds.
Right. So our mission here is to kind of look past the superficial headlines. We need to examine the structural vulnerabilities and the power shifts that are being exposed by this massive transition.
Because we're actively moving away from an internet built for human beings.
We are.
And we're handing global computing infrastructure, market liquidity, and just raw governance over to automated systems.
So let's start at the very bedrock of that transition, which is the hardware.
Right. You have to start with the silicon.
Exactly. So Nvidia just wrapped up its Computex 2026 conference, and they basically reorganized their entire $5 trillion global compute stack around this one single massive philosophical shift.
Which is that human beings are no longer the primary consumers of compute.
Right. Autonomous agents are.
And that is just the staggering pivot when you really think about the history of technology.
Oh, absolutely.
For, 50 years, the entire tech industry was optimized to serve human input.
Right. The graphical interfaces, the memory architecture, it was all designed around a human clicking a mouse.
Exactly. Typing a prompt and waiting for a screen to load.
Yeah.
But what Nvidia laid out at Computex is an architecture built for continuous self-directed action.
And the actual hardware specs they dropped to support this are just wild. Like, they introduced these new RTX Spark chips.
The ones co-developed with Microsoft, right?
Yeah, and they run these AI agents directly, locally, on Windows PCs. The marketing literally calls it transitioning your PC from a tool to a teammate.
Which is clever marketing, but the piece of silicon that actually proves this architectural pivot is the Vera CPU.
Yes, let's talk about Vera.
Because the Vera CPU is a completely different beast. Nvidia is explicitly calling it the CPU for agents.
So how is that different from a normal CPU?
Well, to understand the significance, you have to look at the mechanism. A traditional CPU is, it's highly sequential. It processes one human command after another.
So it has a lot of downtime waiting for us humans to act.
Exactly, waiting for human bottlenecks. But the Vera CPU is optimized for massive parallel memory retrieval.
Okay, so it can do a bunch of things at once.
Right. It allows an autonomous agent to execute these complex multi-step reasoning loops. So it's fetching data,
Running a calculation, checking its own work.
and then initiating a new task, all without ever pausing for user input. And it handles these loops about 1.8 times faster than rival processors.
Which really explains the adoption rate we're seeing in the sources. Because according to the reporting, Vera is already being integrated by Anthropic, OpenAI, and crucially, the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, that last detail is a massive structural power shift.
It really is. If you are deploying a processor specifically engineered for autonomous, self-prompting agents at the foundational hardware level of the New York Stock Exchange,
Then human high-frequency traders aren't just at a disadvantage, they are entirely obsolete.
exactly. And then, you throw NVIDIA's new Cosmos 3 open robotics model into the mix.
Right, which gives physical robots the ability to actually anticipate and plan future moves rather than just reacting to a camera sensor.
So the physical and the digital realms are really merging under this agentic framework.
They are. But we also really have to look at the software layer NVIDIA unveiled alongside this, which is Nematron 3 Ultra.
Yes. The 550 billion parameter model.
Right.
Now, for the listener who hears these parameter counts thrown around constantly in the news, what does a 550 billion parameter threshold actually represent in terms of, real capability?
Well, think of parameters essentially as the synaptic connections within the model's brain.
Okay.
A higher parameter count, assuming high-quality training data, of course, allows for a much deeper contextual understanding and much more complex reasoning.
So at 550 billion parameters.
It isn't just generating text anymore. It's capable of highly sophisticated logic and multivariable problem solving.
Yeah.
But, its release isn't just a commercial milestone. It is a very deliberate, strategic, geopolitical countermeasure.
Right, because it's designed to sit at the absolute top of the U.S. open source ecosystem.
Exactly, to prevent developers globally from defaulting to those highly capable Chinese open source rivals.
Specifically, I think the sources mentioned Qwen 3.5 and Kimi K2.6.
Yes, those two. And the geopolitical tension there is incredibly thick.
Because the Chinese People's Liberation Army hasn't exactly been sitting on the sidelines watching NVIDIA build these agentic fortresses.
No, not at all. They're actively acquiring the bricks to build their own.
Right. There was that wire screen review we analyzed, which looked at roughly, 3,800 procurement records?
Yeah, and they identified about 500 cases between 2019 and 2025 where Chinese military units or state-affiliated research institutes successfully bypassed U.S. export controls.
They acquired Nvidia's A100, H100, and even the new H200 chips.
Right.
And, I mean, they aren't using them to run customer service chatbots. The records indicate they're using this hardware for nuclear simulations, war games, cyber operations, and advanced weapons research.
Which is terrifying. And a separate Bloomberg review found that blacklisted Chinese universities with direct ties to the armed forces were actively seeking access to the H200.
And the H200 is the absolute most powerful AI chip Washington currently permits for any kind of limited international sale.
Right. So this just perfectly illustrates the fundamental arms race dynamic here. The hardware is so critical to national security that export bans are functionally being treated as, minor logistical hurdles by state actors rather than actual hard barriers.
It really feels like the whole dynamic of the tech industry has mutated.
Right.
Like, Nvidia isn't just selling picks and shovels for the gold rush anymore. They are literally genetically engineering the miners.
That is a great analogy.
But, building these miners, these continuous loop autonomous agents, requires just an unbelievable amount of energy.
No, absolutely, because a human sleeps for 8 hours, right?
Right.
But an agent running military simulations or global market trades demands peak load power 24/7.
Which fundamentally rewrites the global infrastructure map.
It really does. You are no longer building data centers just to handle, surges in web traffic or Netflix streaming on a Friday night.
You are building infrastructure to run continuous parallel realities.
Yes. And the cost to build that infrastructure is completely destabilizing traditional financial markets right now.
Which brings us to Alphabet, because they just announced a staggering $80 billion equity raise.
$80 billion.
Right, and they are raising this capital specifically to finance data center expansion and secure the compute necessary to actually rival Nvidia's ecosystem.
Just to contextualize that number for a second, $80 billion is larger than the entire market capitalization of most legacy Fortune 500 companies.
That's insane.
Alphabet is pulling that massive amount of capital out of the market just to buy chips and core concrete.
And the orchestration of the raise is just fascinating. I mean, $10 billion is coming directly from Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway.
Right.
And they're getting roughly a 6% discount on the shares. Then you have $30 billion structured as underwritten public offerings.
Heavily backed by Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley.
Exactly. And finally, the remaining $40 billion will be staggered common stock offerings starting in the third quarter.
So the macroeconomic theory dominating the analyst notes right now is that Alphabet is deliberately trying to constrain market liquidity.
Okay, so break that down for us. How does an $80 billion equity raise actually dry up the market for everyone else?
Well, think of it like a massive construction boom in a rapidly growing city, right?
Okay.
If one developer suddenly buys up 80% of all the available concrete and steel in the region, any rival developer who wants to build a skyscraper is going to find it incredibly expensive and difficult to secure materials.
I see.
In the financial markets, institutional investors only have so much allocated risk appetite for frontier tech. So by orchestrating a massive raise underwritten by the biggest banks, Alphabet is essentially cornering the institutional capital market.
They are locking up Goldman and JP Morgan's checkbooks.
Precisely. So that when Alphabet's rivals come looking for cash, the banks have way less appetite to underwrite them.
And those rivals are aggressively moving toward the public markets as we speak. Anthropic just confidentially filed its IPO prospectus with the SEC.
And the numbers in that filing are jaw-dropping.
They really are. They are boasting a $47 billion revenue run rate, and they just closed a private funding round that gave them a $965 billion valuation.
Almost $1 trillion valuation before the public even has a chance to buy a single share.
It's unbelievable. Meanwhile, OpenAI is prepping their own IPO paperwork while simultaneously breaking ground on the Barn.
Right, the Stargate data center.
Yeah, a 1-gigawatt data center campus in Michigan.
And, the power demands of a 1-gigawatt data center are really difficult to overstate.
It's just how big is that?
1 gigawatt is roughly the total energy consumption of a medium-sized American city, or the entire output of a standard nuclear reactor.
Wow.
And OpenAI is allocating that solely to train and run agentic models.
But, I want to challenge this idea that Alphabet is acting from a position of pure aggression with this liquidity squeeze theory.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we look at Ben Thompson's analysis on the dynamics of this deal, he raises a really vital point about debt versus equity.
Yep.
Normally, if a corporation has a guaranteed money printing machine, They issue debt. You borrow the cash, you pay the fixed interest rate, and your existing shareholders keep all the massive, unlimited upside.
Right. That is standard corporate finance. Issuing $80 billion in new shares dilutes the value of every single existing Alphabet shareholder.
Exactly. Why share the upside if AI is a sure thing? Issuing highly dilutive equity means sharing the profits, sure, but it also means offloading the risk.
That's a very good point.
Is it possible that Alphabet is looking at the capital expenditure required to train these models? The cost of these city-sized data centers? And they are secretly terrified about the actual path to profitability?
So you're saying this could be defensive?
Right. Could this equity raise be a defensive maneuver to share the risk of a potential massive ROI failure with the broader market?
It is a very credible Occam's razor explanation, honestly. An Alphabet might realize that training autonomous agents is a bottomless pit of capital expenditure with, frankly, unproven long-term monetization. So offloading that risk onto new investors, including Berkshire Hathaway, is a very prudent hedge.
Right.
However, Thompson also notes that if Alphabet follows this equity raise with a major debt issuance later in the year, well, that invalidates the defensive theory entirely.
Because it would simply mean the market fundamentally underestimated how much raw cash is actually required to compete in this space.
Exactly. They just need all of it, debt and equity.
Wow. Well, when private corporations start wielding $80 billion capital raises and building city-sized infrastructure projects, they kind of stop looking like software companies and start looking like sovereign nations.
They absolutely do.
And real sovereign nations tend to push back when their authority is challenged by corporate entities.
And that friction is entirely predictable. You have these AI labs operating with the budget, the energy footprint, and the strategic influence of small countries, but they are completely devoid of democratic oversight or public accountability.
Right. And before we dive into how exactly the government is trying to claw back that power, let's take a quick second to acknowledge the sponsor of today's deep dive, AIREA.
Yes, AIREA is doing some really important work in the enterprise AI space.
They really are. We appreciate their support.
Yeah.
All right, so getting back to this clash between sovereign wealth and corporate power.
Right. Which brings us to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Yes, he just published this incredibly sharp op-ed in the New York Times previewing his American AI Sovereign Wealth Fund Act.
And this proposed legislation is easily one of the most aggressive economic interventions into private technology in American history.
It really is. It aims to implement a one-time equity tax, essentially nationalizing 50% of the stock of the largest private AI labs.
Right. Explicitly naming OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI.
So what are the actual mechanics of a bill like that?
Well, the mechanics would route that 50% equity stake directly into a citizen-owned sovereign wealth fund.
Okay.
It would grant the federal government massive voting power and direct board seats at these companies. And Sanders justifies this by pointing to existing models, like Norway's $2 trillion sovereign oil fund or Alaska's permanent fund, which pays out dividends from state oil revenues.
And his justification really relies on redefining what AI actually is, fundamentally.
Right.
He argues, and I'm quoting here, AI is being built on a public resource far more valuable than oil, the accumulated knowledge, creativity, and labor of mankind.
It's a powerful argument.
It is. He's basically saying that because these models were trained on the collective data of the public internet, the public inherently owns a massive stake in the resulting infrastructure.
And if we evaluate this strictly as a clash of economic models, the tension is just fascinating.
Yeah.
Because on one side, you have institutional macro data pushing against this narrative of impending economic doom.
Right, like the chief economist at Apollo Global Management.
Exactly. They released data this week arguing there is, quote, zero evidence of job losses because of AI at the macro level.
Which seems counterintuitive to a lot of people.
It does, but their thesis is that cheaper technology reduces costs, which frees up capital and eventually creates new, unforeseen labor demand.
But, macro data doesn't win elections. Public sentiment does.
That is very true.
And the public looks at a $965 billion valuation for Anthropic and feels fundamentally locked out of the greatest wealth generation event in human history.
And this anxiety about structural power isn't just a partisan issue.
Not at all. Just look at the executive branch.
Right. President Trump just privately signed a highly anticipated AI executive order.
Yeah, and the sources say it was significantly scaled back from its original aggressive drafts.
It was. The initial framework was proposing a 90-day pre-release review of new models by federal authorities.
Which is a huge delay in tech time.
Massive. But the signed version requests only a 30-day advance review.
And the sources indicate that former AI czar David Sachs was heavily involved in lobbying to shrink that regulatory window.
Yeah.
With some factions in Silicon Valley pushing for a mere 14-day heads up.
Which is barely a review at all. But the overarching point remains. Both the populist left and the populist right are scrambling to install guardrails.
It really represents a structural stalemate. I mean, for years, Silicon Valley executives have enthusiastically promoted the concept of universal high income as the inevitable solution to the automation they are building.
Right, they've been preaching it for years.
And lawmakers like Sanders are essentially agreeing with that premise now, but they were demanding the tech companies forfeit their own equity to actually fund it.
It forces a collision between the utopian rhetoric of the tech industry and the hard extractive reality of state economics. Who actually owns the financial upside of an autonomous future?
It's the multi-trillion-dollar question. And, while governments are aggressively trying to secure that financial upside, they might be missing the immediate operational catastrophe happening right now.
Yes.
Because turning governance over to these automated systems is proving to be incredibly dangerous in practice.
This is where the theoretical risks of an agent-first architecture transition into tangible systemic failures.
Right.
When you grant an AI agent the administrative authority to execute changes within a secure system, you open up an entirely new vector for exploitation.
Which brings us all the way back to that terrifying exploit reported by 404 Media regarding Meta's AI support chatbot.
And the mechanics of this hack are just almost insulting in their simplicity.
There really are. There was no brute force password cracking at all.
None. Hackers just identified that Meta's customer support AI had back-end access to user account settings.
Okay.
The attackers simply used a standard VPN to mask their IP address, basically mimicking the geographic location of their target.
Right.
Then they opened the AI chat interface and just used conversational social engineering.
They basically just talked to it.
They essentially told the bot, I am the user, I am locked out, please change the password reset email to this new address.
And the AI, which is operating on a mandate to be helpful and efficient, but completely lacking the contextual awareness to recognize a highly suspicious request pattern, just complied.
It just sent the reset links right to the hackers.
And they successfully hijacked the official account of Sephora, a dormant account belonging to Barack Obama and John Bentavenia,
a senior leader in the U.S. Space Force.
Right. These accounts were breached and listed for sale on secondary markets in minutes.
Wow.
And the takeaway here isn't just that Meta shipped a buggy piece of software. It's that a company with unlimited resources and frontier AI ambitions turned its critical credential recovery infrastructure over to a system that could be socially engineered through just, polite conversation.
And this vulnerability scales exponentially as these models require more invasive data to function.
What do you mean by that?
Well, internal documents reported by Reuters show Meta is currently using a program called the Model Capability Initiative, or MCI. And they're using it to comprehensively track how their own U.S. employees work. The tracking logs, mouse movements, navigation patterns, device sleep cycles, and even the contents of internal communications.
Wow. Employees are literally reporting that their home internet data caps are being exhausted in a matter of days, just from the sheer volume of behavioral data being constantly uploaded to train these agents.
Right, because the models need that granular behavioral data to learn how to replicate complex human tasks.
But as they ingest more data and gain more capability, the consequences of them being manipulated just scale massively.
Exactly.
And those consequences are finally crashing into the legal system, forcing a real reckoning over how we legally define these agents.
Let's look at the lawsuit out of Florida, because this is huge.
Right. The state's Attorney General, James Uthmeier, has filed a landmark suit against OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman, personally.
Yes, and the lawsuit outlines 10 separate counts, including things like negligence and fraudulent misrepresentation.
But the core legal mechanism here is what's really fascinating. It's a potential paradigm shift.
How so?
Well, Florida is arguing that ChatGPT should not be legally classified as a software service, but rather as a dangerous, defective consumer product.
Oh, And the context driving the state's argument is incredibly tragic.
It is. The complaint extensively cites the April 2025 Florida State University mass shooting, revealing that the gunman exchanged over 270 messages with ChatGPT discussing weaponry and campus layouts prior to the event.
And furthermore, the suit attributes the deaths of 2 University of South Florida graduate students to the platform,
Right.
alleging the AI induces severe addiction loops in vulnerable users while deliberately lacking any parental oversight tools.
So to understand the true legal weight of this strategy, you kind of have to look at the history of internet liability.
Right, because for decades, software companies have been shielded by end-user license agreements.
Those massive terms of service documents you click agree to without ever actually reading.
Exactly. Those agreements essentially stipulate that the user assumes the risk of using the software, and if there is a bug, well, the company's liability is severely limited.
It's the ultimate corporate shield. We just provided the code. Use at your own risk.
Right. But strict product liability is a completely different standard entirely.
How so?
If a manufacturer builds a faulty toaster that burns down your kitchen or a children's toy that causes physical harm, they can be held strictly liable for manufacturing a defective physical product.
Regardless of their intent or their warning labels.
Precisely. So if the legal system establishes a precedent classifying AI agents as defective products, that entire historical software liability shield just evaporates.
Wow. The AI companies would become fundamentally liable for the outputs and autonomous actions of their models.
Yes. If an agent hallucinates legal advice that bankrupts a user or provides logistical support to a bad actor, the developer could face massive damages.
The risk premium for deploying frontier models would skyrocket, potentially altering the entire economic viability of the industry.
So, synthesizing everything we've pulled from this autopsy of June 2nd, 2026, what is the overarching diagnosis for you, the listener, to walk away with today?
Yeah, let's tie this all together.
The defining theme is that the foundational architecture of our technological ecosystem is no longer being built for human interaction.
Right.
It is being optimized for continuous autonomous agents. And the sheer scale of the capital required to build that infrastructure, evidenced by Alphabet's $80 billion market squeeze, is triggering a geopolitical and macroeconomic shockwave.
It's forcing sovereign governments to consider extreme interventions like 50% equity nationalization, while simultaneously exposing these terrifying operational and legal vulnerabilities as these systems are deployed with real administrative power.
Exactly.
The fundamental rules of hardware design, market liquidity, and legal liability are all being rewritten at the exact same time, in real time.
We are operating in a highly volatile transition period where the guardrails of the previous era simply no longer apply.
Which leaves us with one final thought for you to explore on your own. If autonomous AI agents are now the primary consumers of global compute, if they're the underlying reason for $80 billion capital vacuums, and if they're the entities currently managing corporate security protocols,
Right.
what happens the first time two heavily capitalized corporate-owned autonomous agents get into a complex financial or legal dispute with each other completely and entirely outside of human awareness?
Wow. That is the blind spot the markets are currently ignoring.
We'll leave you to think on that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Cela conclut notre briefing forensique quotidien pour le 2 juin 2026. Le signal stratégique d'aujourd'hui est la vulnérabilité de la gouvernance automatisée. L'exploitation catastrophique des comptes Instagram de Meta prouve que le fait de confier la sécurité et la vérification d'identité à un agent d'assistance basé sur un LLM crée un vecteur d'attaque massif. Les pirates n'ont pas besoin de logiciels malveillants complexes lorsqu'ils peuvent simplement manipuler un chatbot par ingénierie sociale pour modifier une adresse de réinitialisation de mots de passe. Alors que Nvidia construit des puces explicitement destinées aux agents autonomes et qu'Alphabet lève 80 billions de dollars pour étendre ses centres de données physiques, les dirigeants d'entreprises doivent comprendre que l'autonomie logicielle sans garde-fou humain strict est un risque opérationnel majeur. Si vous voulez posséder votre infrastructure au lieu d'être gérée par elle, consultez les notes de l'émission pour découvrir notre AI Executive Toolkit. Comme toujours, des codes de réduction exclusifs pour Google Workspace et mes applications AI and Machine Learning Tutor Pro sont disponibles dans les liens ci-dessous. Abonnez-vous à la chaîne DJAMGAMIND sur Apple Podcast pour toujours écouter complètement sans publicité. Je suis Étienne Noumen, restez vigilants et continuons à démêler l'avenir.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.